There comes a point when the life that once protected you starts to imprison you. You're not ungrateful. You're not lost. Your soul has just outgrown the pattern your nervous system still calls home. And this is one of the hardest thresholds to cross, because the old life doesn't always feel like darkness at first. Sometimes it feels like safety. Sometimes it feels like loyalty. Sometimes it feels like the only version of yourself that could survive in a cruel world. But the soul knows when an old shelter has become a new cage. And when that knowing begins, you can no longer return to the old pattern with the same innocence. Every soul has a place it once called home, because that place taught it how to survive. A pattern can become a sanctuary. A wound can become an altar. A fear can become a familiar doorway that you keep walking through, because at least you know what waits on the other side. This is why leaving an old life can feel so uncomfortable. You may know something is hurting you, but part of you is still attached to it. You may know a cycle is finished, but something inside of you still feels pulled back toward the familiar pain. The mind says, "This is who we are." The body says, "This is how we stay safe." The pattern says, "This is home." But the soul begins to whisper something else. It doesn't always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it arrives as exhaustion. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet inability to keep pretending. Sometimes it arrives as a deep sadness you can't explain, because nothing outside of you has obviously collapsed, yet something inside of you knows the old structure can no longer comfort you. This is the ancient path of awakening. Before the soul can be free, it must first realize that what it once called home was only the architecture of conditioning. The old identity was built around pain. The old choices were built around protection. The old desires were shaped by what you had to become in order to be emotionally safe. And then one day, the soul begins to remember itself beneath the tension of the old way of life. It realizes just enough to make the old world feel too small. Just enough to make old conversations feel empty. And just enough to make the life that once held you begin to feel like something you were being held back by. The pattern isn't evil because it imprisoned you. The pattern began as protection. It formed because some part of you needed order inside of chaos. It formed because your nervous system needed guidance. It formed because the child within needed some way to understand how to remain intact. So don't hate the pattern. See it. A pattern loses its throne when it is seen clearly. In many ancient traditions, the human being was not seen as merely a personality moving through time. The human being was seen as a soul clothed in layers. Layers of memory, fear, and desire. The Gnostics understood this through the language of veils. They didn't believe the soul was absent. They believed the soul became entangled in what wasn't its true nature. They believed the soul began to mistake the garment for the self. Or in other words, the soul began to mistake the world of illusion for the world of truth. This is why the soul's departure from the pattern created within the illusion can feel like death. Because something is dying. The version of you that learned to call limitation safety. That's why you feel grief when you leave behind something that hurt you. That's why peace can feel strangely uncomfortable right after leaving a source of pain. That's why freedom can feel like abandonment when your entire nervous system was trained inside captivity. The old pattern says, "Stay here. This is familiar. You'll be safe here." But the soul says, familiar safety is not the same as truth. And that is where the door begins to open, and the threshold that every awakening soul must cross is found. It's not the threshold between good and evil. It's the threshold between the old familiar pattern and truth. This is where many people turn back, They're not weak. The old pattern just knows how to imitate belonging. It knows how to speak in the voice of obligation, guilt, and fear. It knows how to make the unknown look dangerous, even when the unknown is the doorway to your own becoming. The soul must become willing to disappoint the pattern. That's one of the most sacred and terrifying moments in inner transformation. Because the pattern will demand proof. It will question why you are changing. It will remind you of what you used to be. It will tell you that leaving is betrayal. It will make you feel selfish for wanting peace, arrogant for wanting truth, and unsafe for choosing a life that no longer revolves around the old pattern of suffering. But the soul doesn't leave the pattern because it hates the past. The soul leaves because it can no longer worship survival as destiny. What you are leaving isn't a place. It's an identity. It may be a way of loving. It may be a way of explaining yourself. It may be a way of shrinking so other people can remain comfortable. It may even be a way of keeping your own light dim, because darkness once taught you that being seen was dangerous. And when the soul sees this, it doesn't need to violently rebel against the old life. It simply stops kneeling before it. In the symbolic language of the mystics, this is the exodus of consciousness. The soul leaves the inner Egypt. It walks out of the empire of repetition. It steps away from the false rulers of fear, shame, and unconscious loyalty. The archons of the mind are not only cosmic images. They are also the inner voices that tell the soul, you belong to the pattern. You belong to the loop. You belong to the old way of life. But the soul was never owned by the pattern. It was only asleep inside of it. And once the soul begins to awaken, the old prison walls become transparent. You begin to see the cracks. You begin to see that the door was never locked from the outside. You begin to see that what felt like loyalty was often fear wearing sacred clothing. This doesn't make leaving easy. It makes leaving necessary. Because the soul cannot fully enter its next existence while still calling the old prison home. In your everyday life, this may seem subtle. It could look like finally not responding in the same dramatic way to the same dramatic argument. It might look like no longer chasing the person who only recognizes the wounded version of you and treats you as such. It may look like choosing peace, even when peace feels unfamiliar. Or it could even look like standing in the doorway of a new life, feeling grief for the old one, but knowing that you can't go back. That grief doesn't mean that you made the wrong choice. It means that the pattern was once your reality. It means that the old life carried a version of you that didn't know another way of life. So bless, forgive, and release that old version of yourself. Don't drag it into your new life and make it your master. Let it become an ancestor. Let the old self be honored, but not obeyed. Because the soul must leave what the pattern calls home. Not because the soul is cruel, not because the past was meaningless, but because there's a deeper home beneath the false shelter. A home that wasn't built by fear, that wasn't guarded by pain, and wasn't dependent on the approval of anything outside of the truth of your own being. That home isn't behind you. It's not in the old familiar suffering. It's in the quiet center that begins to appear when you stop confusing survival with your true being. If this journey spoke to you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone ready to experience life beyond thought. Comment below, what old pattern are you finally ready to stop calling home? I read every comment. If you would like to support my work directly, you can do so at buymeacoffee.com/ Magnum Opus 333. Or you can explore some original merchandise at my Teespring store online. The link is in the description below. Or perhaps consider becoming a channel member or sending us super thanks. Any support is greatly appreciated. Remember, your consciousness is the key that unlocks reality. Let's keep unlocking it together. Thank you for watching. Until next time.